There's a specific kind of exhaustion that hits you on the drive home from the airport. Your bags are in the trunk, your phone's dead, and somewhere between the last terminal and the highway, the trip is already becoming a story you'll tell at dinner. The tan fades in a week, the photos stay, but there's something else that stays too. Something quieter, something nobody really prepares you for, and it's not the jet lag. My name's Daniel, and for the past few years, I've been obsessed with one question. Why do the smartest, most financially aware people I know still come home from vacation quietly, measurably worse off, and somehow completely at peace with it? This isn't a video about whether you should travel. Of course you should travel. This is about something stranger and more specific, the invisible architecture of how vacation spending works on your mind before you've even packed a bag, and why the financial damage isn't in the big, obvious purchases. It's in the quiet decisions you make when your brain has already checked into the hotel 3 days before you have. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with someone I'll call Marcus. He's 34, works in supply chain management in Charlotte, makes around $78,000 a year, and by most measures, he's disciplined. He maxes out his Roth IRA every year. He doesn't carry a balance on his cards. He meal preps, and then every April, he goes to Mexico. Not extravagantly, a mid-range all-inclusive 5 nights, usually around $3,200 all in with flights. He pays for it out of savings, feels no guilt about it, and honestly, he probably shouldn't. But here's what Marcus told me when I asked him about it. He said, "It's the one thing I don't budget." And when I asked him why, he paused for a second and said, "Because it's not really spending, it's living." That sentence is doing a tremendous amount of work, and I want to sit with it for a moment because I think it's the most honest, accidental confession about vacation psychology I've ever heard. Marcus has, without realizing it, placed travel into a completely separate mental category, one where normal financial logic doesn't apply. Economists actually have a term for this. It's called mental accounting. We don't treat money as one unified resource. We treat it as separate pools, each with its own emotional rules. The vacation pool is sacred. It's the one bucket that justifies itself automatically, and the travel industry has spent decades making sure that's exactly how you feel. Think about the language used to sell you a trip. Every airline, every hotel chain, every booking platform in America runs on the same few phrases. You deserve this. Life is short. Make memories that last forever. None of that language is accidental. It's carefully engineered to move your decision-making out of the rational part of your brain into something much harder to argue with, your identity. Because once a purchase becomes about who you are rather than what it costs, no number in a spreadsheet can compete with it. You're not buying a plane ticket. You're buying proof that you know how to live. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting and honestly a little uncomfortable. There's decades of psychology research on what actually makes vacations satisfying, and the conclusions are deeply inconvenient for the travel industry. The biggest predictor of whether a vacation improves your well-being isn't where you go, it isn't the quality of the hotel, it isn't even how far you travel. It's whether you were genuinely able to disconnect. That's it, the mental off switch. A study tracking people before and after vacations found that the happiness boost from travel typically peaks before the trip, during the anticipation phase, and returns almost completely to baseline within 2 weeks of getting home. 2 weeks! The emotional ROI on that $4,000 trip has a shorter shelf life than the leftovers in your fridge. Now, none of this means vacations are a waste, but it raises a question worth sitting with. If a long weekend at a cabin 3 hours away produces nearly the same well-being effect as a $6,000 trip to Portugal, and the research genuinely suggests it can, then what exactly are we paying the difference for? The answer, if you're honest, is usually social. We're paying for the version of the trip that's worth talking about. We're paying for the photo that makes a stranger on Instagram stop scrolling. We're paying for the identity signal, the subtle communication to our coworkers and our family that we're the kind of people who go places. That's not a small thing. Social belonging is a real human need, but it's worth knowing that's what's being purchased, because when you know that, you can ask yourself if there's a cheaper way to meet that need.
Here's where I want to introduce some math, not to lecture you, but because a single number changed how I think about this forever. Let's say you take one $4,000 trip every year from age 30 to 60. You pay cash, no debt, totally responsible. Over that time, you'll spend $120,000 on travel. Fine, but if you took even half that, $2,000 a year, and invested the other $2,000 annually in a standard index fund earning a historical average return of around 8%, you'd have approximately $244,000 by 60. That's not retirement money in the grand sense, but it's a year of full income. It's a car paid off and then some. It's the kind of number that makes a real difference in what your options look like at 62, when your knees hurt and you're quietly hoping you don't have to work until 67. And the painful thing is, most people would never consciously choose $120,000 in trips over $244,000 in freedom. They just never look at it that way because they make the decision 1 year at a time, one booking screen at a time, in the exact emotional state that makes careful thinking hardest. If you're finding this useful, by the way, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you'll catch the next one. I do these consistently, and I think you'll like where they go. Now, let me tell you about the second layer of this trap, because the first layer is spending more than you intended. The second layer is subtler and in some ways worse. It's the way vacations create a financial permission slip that extends beyond the trip itself. Marcus, our friend from Charlotte, told me something else when I pressed him. He said that in the weeks before his Mexico trip every year, he notices he's looser with everything. He'll eat out more, he'll buy the better bottle of wine, he'll grab the Uber instead of waiting for the bus. It's like I'm already in vacation mode, he told me with a laugh. But here's what that actually means financially. Research on what's called the licensing effect shows that when people feel like they've earned a reward or are about to receive one, they unconsciously permit themselves extra spending in unrelated areas. The vacation becomes a psychological green light that bleeds backward in time, inflating your expenses in the weeks before you've even left. The trip costs $3,200 on paper. The full cost, when you include the loosened spending in the month before and the 2 weeks of I deserve a treat recovery spending after, is quietly something different. And then there's the subscription version of vacation that almost nobody talks about. I'm not referring to timeshares. That's its own catastrophe. I'm talking about the way people structure their lives around a single annual trip as a pressure release valve. They spend 50 weeks in a life that feels vaguely unsatisfying, then compress all the rest, all the novelty and the connection and the permission to enjoy things, into 2 weeks in July. And the problem with that structure isn't just financial. It means you're running a deficit of joy for the most of the year and then trying to overdraft on it all at once. Research in positive psychology is consistent on this. Frequent small positive experiences outperform infrequent large ones in their long-term effect on life satisfaction. A weekend trip every 2 months, even a modest one, does more for your sustained well-being than one blowout trip a year, and it almost certainly costs less. So here's what I'd actually suggest, not as a prescription, but as a reframe. Stop treating your vacation budget as a single annual number that you spend all at once. Instead, divide it into 3 smaller experiences spread across the year. A drive distance weekend in spring, something slightly bigger in summer, a short fall trip. The total cost is the same or less. The well-being impact, based on what the research says, is higher. The social pressure to make each one worth it is lower, and you stop having the whole year riding on whether one particular week in one place met the emotional expectations you've been building since January. Travel at its best is genuinely one of the more human things you can spend money on, not because it's exotic or expensive, but because novelty and rest and time with people you love are actually in short supply in most of our lives. The problem was never the trip. The problem is the invisible financial logic we've allowed to build up around it. The mental accounting, the identity signaling, the licensing effect, the annual pressure valve structure. Seeing those things clearly doesn't mean you stop going places. It means you stop going into debt for a photo that doesn't include the credit card statement underneath it. The right trip, taken within your means, with the people that matter, somewhere you can actually breathe, that trip is worth every dollar. The The question worth asking yourself before you book isn't, can I afford this? It's, do I actually know what I'm paying for? I'll see you in the next one. And before you go, I'm genuinely curious. When was the last time you came home from a trip and felt like it was completely worth the money? Drop it in the comments. I read every one.